Average med school debt, someone that is graduating medical school without any undergrad debt, is going to be about 220,000. That's on average. Whereas if you add on undergrad, then it's going to be closer to 250,000. So $250,000 when you come out. Now, you have 3 years of residency, and if you do an additional 2 or 3 years of fellowship, that's going to blow up to.
I always wonder, are these students making the appropriate decision if it's all based on money? Because they get out into big law to get paid $200,000 plus, but I don't know if they necessarily comprehend the amount of work and effort and politics that will go into their career as they move forward.
For those viewers who have lasted through the entire episode, I am actually going to put up here on the screen the breakdown of the salaries that I found. Medicine,
law, friendship. This is Dr. Long and Lawyer Nik. You're listening to the Medical Legal Brief.
One doctor, one lawyer, and a whole lot of gray area. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode here on the Medical Legal Brief with Dr. Long and Lawyer Nik. The last episode, we went over the different specialties in the medical and legal fields. And today, I want to follow up on the income changes or differences between the different specialties. But if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, follow, like our content wherever you may be watching from. Spotify and YouTube are our main channels, but we are also on TikTok as well. So again, make sure you subscribe and like if you haven't already. But all right, Nik, I'm really interested to see the income disparities or the income differences amongst different specialties among legal after that follow-up from last episode.
You know what's kind of funny is that growing up, my mom always taught me the 3 things that you should never talk about with other people is politics, religion, and money, your salary. We've hit the trifecta. We were there now.
Yes, this is going to complete that trifecta for sure.
Oh.
But I think that's the important thing about our channel and us is that we want to keep everything out as open and just honest to our viewers as much as possible and keep everything as transparent as possible.
When you are in high school and you're trying to think about your future, money always plays a role. And I don't know if it's the American dream that instills it. I don't know if it's our parents that instill it. We come from a generation where our parents took the approach of work really, really hard, do your best, and somehow you'll be able to achieve whatever version of the American dream that you're trying to achieve, whether that's you'll be rich or famous or be able to retire early. With the onset of technology and information, some of those things are more readily available. Making money is more readily available, but also the realization of where you compare against the peers in your field with whatever career specialization you're in.
Of course, in today's world, a lot of things are materialistic. Everything that we want to obtain or have or a way so it means requires money. For us to travel, we have to have money. For us to buy food and eat different cuisines and enjoy different cultures, you have to spend money. And then, of course, for us to actually support our family, have a house, have a car, those are all things that require money. And so, of course, it's going to be a very important part of what we keep in mind all the time. In an ideal world, we don't think about it, but realistically, it's a very important part of our daily lives.
I had a philosophical thought there when it comes to money, because for materialistic, you even need money to do the things that are non-materialistic. If you wanted to go do a charitable contribution, you need money. If you want to go volunteer your time, you're giving up the ability to go make money to volunteer your time, or you're paying for the gas to get there, the transportation to get there. Money makes the world go round. And even when it comes to the simplest things of maybe going to go walk through a national park, you still got to pay the entry fee to get into that national park. I wish it was different. It's very hard to make your way through life without having the funds and the finances for it. And so hopefully this podcast gives insight today for our legal and medical peers as they either are entering the workforce or trying to figure out where they stand in the workforce if they haven't done the research already.
Again, going deeper, if we think about the influence on today's society and the way laws and just how everything functions in society, the bigger say is usually the ones with the bigger pockets. You're gonna affect more change if you're able to pay someone or give more money. That's an unfortunate part of this world, and we're just trying to navigate through it the best way we can and focus in on what we can do here locally.
So, Long, you obviously knew in college that you were going to go to med school. How much of a role did the financial security of being a doctor play in that decision initially?
I actually never thought about the income in terms of how much I was going to make. I
Okay.
didn't think about the income potential. I didn't even look up salaries, honestly. The only thing I was focusing on is, one, did I enjoy the field? Was it going to be a career that I could sustain for 30, 40 years? And was I going to be happy? And then two, job security. Was it going to be something that the community was always going to need? And so for medicine, that made sense. It ticked off those two boxes for me. And so therefore I pursued it, and I'm glad I still enjoy it and love everything that I do.
Mhm.
How about you? Did you think about income? Was that a part of your thought process? I know your journey was a little different. You were shooting for something else and landed where you are now, though.
Same thing. I don't know if it was a little bit of me trying to play the martyr role, but I thought by joining the FBI or getting into government service, I thought I was, being the martyr of I don't need the money. I'm going to go play the role of hero and go give back to my country in the way I saw fit via the FBI. However, when I started, in law school and you started hearing the offers that were being thrown around for first year associates, and you started hearing about how much people were making for internships and like the potential and possibility. I mean, even myself, I got offered certain dollar amounts to continue in my law practice, and it's eye opening, and it can definitely be tempting, especially when you're looking at wanting to move your life along. Buying a house, buying a car, paying off student loan debt, investments, anything that you're looking at financially for the future.
I actually have no idea what a lawyer makes. All I know is that if I ever have worked with a lawyer, I always have to pay really large amounts per hourly rates.
Yeah.
And so I'm actually curious, because this is the first time I'm actually going to hear about truly what a lawyer and attorney makes. You're going to really be enlightening me on how much you used to make.
Yeah, I feel the same way about doctors and physician salaries, because you just in your brain think they make a lot of money. Surely they make the most money out of everybody. So I'm curious to hear what you have as well.
Okay. Well, let's start with you, Nick. So let's for example, I don't know if you've set it up to where you have all the different specialties, but I'm curious, for someone coming out, graduated law school, and they're coming out with their first job, what is the average income that you would expect to negotiate, and what's going to be in that first year?
Lawyer answer, it depends. It always depends. And it depends on the path that you choose. We've talked about this several times in our podcast as far as your careers go, especially in the different specialties. You have your big law, you have your mid-sized firms, you have solo or private practice or smaller firms. You also have defense attorney, you have prosecutor, you have the ability to go be in-house counsel. So depending on the career path that you pick, that dictates what that value should be. When you're looking at, let's say, big law, which is what everybody associates with lawyers, you see the shows, you see the towers downtown, you see people working in the corner office and the beautiful views, and you think, okay, wow, they probably make a lot of money. And they do. When you first come out, you are considered a first year associate. And from my understanding, when you're looking at big law, which is, these huge firms of hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds, sometimes thousands of attorneys in the big law firm, you're looking at what's called the Kravitz scale. And so the Kravitz scale was created by a big law firm in New York City. And what it basically does is that firm has dictated throughout the years what the scale of associates in big law should be getting paid. And the reason that the other firms rely on this scale is because it helps limit the amount of competition and keeps all the big law associates on an even playing field. Now, things can change up depending on what region you're in, what the demographics look like. But primarily speaking, when you look at big law, you're looking at the Kravitz scale. Generally speaking, first year associates are coming out making about $200,000 to $225,000 a year. Sometimes even getting up to the 250s, depending on if you are able to maybe negotiate a bonus structure or negotiate other perks. And then from there, it just increases. So whether you're looking at second year associate, third year associate, fourth year associate, so on and so forth. So that's for a first year associate going big law. That's why those positions are so coveted, because you're making a killing as a 25, 26-year-old getting out into the workforce.
All right. So it's an expectation, though, that even though you start at that range, that you will have an increase or a bump in salary as the years goes
Yep.
on, as your experience.
Yep. For all of our listeners, you can go on and you can pull these data metrics. You can go actually look at the scales. Looking at the numbers right next to me, a second year associate, 225 to 250, a third year associate, 250 to 290. Fourth year, you're breaking that $300,000 mark and getting up to 345. Fifth year, 350 to 395. And then sixth, seventh, by the time you're at your eighth year, you're making almost $500,000. And those are just for associates. Those don't even include the non-equity or equity partners that a firm may have.
So it's a little different on the medical side. The income that we start out with is usually stagnant. It doesn't really inflate that much. You don't really get a huge jump the longer you go. There may be a small bump. Majority of the incomes actually stay fairly stagnant, especially if you look back over the last 10, 15 years. It's gone up maybe 20, 30,000 over that span of the decade. And so for us, specialty wise, you're going to see that the incomes for primary care. So if you guys remember back from our last episode, we talked about primary care are going to be our generalists. So these are going to be our family doctors, internal medicine doctors, OBGYN, pediatricians. These are the ones that see all types of patients and have to know a little bit about everything. They get usually paid the least amount at the bottom of the scale, whereas your surgeons are going to be at the top. So your neurosurgeon, orthopedic surgeon, vascular surgeon, they're going to pay at the top. So the disparity, you're going to see the big range is the surgeons can hit the top at almost, again, about 650. And this is going to be within the first 1 or 2 years when they come out. That's what they would expect to make. Obviously, over time, as they build their panel, as they're more efficient with their surgeries, it can shoot up even more to maybe 900, even 1 million for some surgeons, but they might be working quite a bit. In terms of family docs, primary care, we actually start closer to about 240 to 250. So about $250,000. And again, that is pretty stagnant. The majority of primary care physicians don't see a pay bump that often. And as we talked in other episodes, there are some different pay structures in terms of what is salary versus you make what you kill. So it's there's that RVU bonus, or how many patients you see or how difficult your patients are may produce a little bit more money or additional bonuses. Or if you hit certain metrics, if your patient panel is really healthy, the employer may pay you a little bit more. $15,000 to $20,000 bonuses a year. So it's not a drastic difference from what you're already on.
I already have some questions for you. With a first year associate at a big law firm, you have required billables and you are starting to prove yourself as an attorney. Now, granted, we all acknowledge the fact that you don't really know how to be an attorney until you get to the firm, where you're selecting a student based on their law school criteria. So GPA, extracurriculars, on top of them coming in and interning at your office. Most of the time in your second year, you've already interned with that big firm. They've given you an offer, a contingent on you passing the bar exam usually, and then you're coming to work. Well, you can end up staying at that firm and, getting the salary bumps every single year, but you're also still trying to prove yourself. If you can't do the work, you're going to get washed out. You're going to get fired. You're going to get reprimands. You're going to maybe even be forced out into a situation where you got to go find another job. So it surprises me that a surgeon who has a skill set that I'm assuming has been developed during residency has such a great amount, but you still have to work your way up and still prove yourself in your skills and really hone those down as you work towards that $1 million mark. So is that a good assessment as to what the surgeons have to go through as they're working through?
Well, remember, we have the uniqueness of residency where you are honing those skills. Once you come out, it's more about building that patient panel and building the rapport with the patients, but also your employer and the community. Of course, as physicians, we are looked upon, dependent upon in the community. The more that people need you or want you, they're going to want to pay you more to keep you around. So that's the nice thing. I would say that starting out with the surgical specialties, it usually starts closer to about $500,000 up to that 700,000 coming out in the first 1 or 2 years. And that's because they have to be enticed to come to that area. Obviously, they're not going to be producing enough to give that back to the hospital system. But the hospital system is basically saying, hey, we're going to give you this amount. Even if you don't see a single patient, you're going to get this amount because we're hoping that in a couple of years, you're going to be overproducing, which will then bring the profits back to the system.
So it's like a return on the investment, essentially.
Correct. And that goes for not just the surgeons. That's going to be for your primary care. When I started out, we went over this on our review of our medical contract
Mhm.
is that I, as a family physician, I have to have at least 1 or 2 years where I am on a salary because I can't just go straight into practice and depending on how many patients I see is what I get paid. Then I wouldn't get paid anything that first year
Yeah,
because my patient panel will grow very slowly. So I get a guarantee timeline where it's usually between 1 or 2 years, and I get paid that no matter how many patients I see. That way, it entices me to stay at the job, but also helps me stay afloat in my own personal life that I can pay the bills, I can pay the student debt.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That works funny that way. The more money you make, the more you try to determine what your work-life balance should be. And I
Mhm.
have some caveats as we work through some of these numbers because you hear the salary, but you don't necessarily always associate the hourly rate that ends up becoming your hourly rate because there's requirements. You have billables, you have certain hours that you have to meet. The salary seems really, really good, but if you were to do the math and break down your rate per hour, you might be making more in a different area than if you were in your current area.
Do the billables change
Mhm.
as you go through your seniority? Are you working more or are you actually working less as you get in senior?
That's a very good question. Typically, the 2,000 hour mark is the standard for just your regular corporate life. So if you were going to go work 40 hours a week for 52 weeks, get your vacation time, get your weekends, you're hitting about 2,000 hours. For a lot of big law firms, the billable requirement is already over 2,000 hours. You go to work and you are going to be doing stuff that you bill the client for. You're also going to be doing things that are considered non-billables, whether that might be a meeting with your staff, whether that might be a lunch, whether that might be a CLE or some sort of pro bono requirement that you may have. So you have all these other things that go into working that you can't necessarily bill to, which then makes your work life balance a lot more strict on when you're in the office and how much time you actually have to put forward. But that changes throughout. So I know that we're talking big law. Generally, in big law, you're working anywhere between 55 to 90 hours per week. You're working on the weekends, you're working nights, just not including billables. That's just what you're working. As you drop on down, you have the other areas of law that we'll get into where you're looking at mid-sized firms or you're looking at solo practice, you're looking at being a prosecutor, and those can allow. You might be looking at your 40 to 70 hours per week. If it's your own practice, you can work as much as you want, you can work as little as you want. But to your point, you eat what you kill. If you can't get the dollar amount, then you might need to increase how many hours you're actually working to get the salary that you need to sustain your livelihood.
Good point. There is some data out there in terms of how much residents work. If we're just looking back before you even come out as an attending, residents actually make less than minimum wage in some places because they are working over their hours. There's supposed to be a limit of a certain amount per week and then per month, but it's very rare that they truly abide by it. It may be something that they write down on paper as they're abiding by the rules, but I would say 80% of residencies out there do not actually keep track of that because patients are always going to need help. There's always going to need coverage. And to your point, as you come out to attending, there are a lot of other responsibilities. It's not just seeing the patient in the clinic, but there are charts that you have to finish. There are lab results that you have to answer. There are phone calls that you have to answer. And then you have to deal with the insurances. And then on weekends, there are calls. You have to be on call for the community. You have to be on call overnights. These all add up to the hours, unspoken hours, beyond just the 30, 36 to 40 hours that you're doing physically in clinic.
Now, working our way down like the list, how much are residents getting paid, if they're getting paid at all? Obviously, you just talked about their work hours, but what does a residency salary look like?
Residency salary usually ranges between 50 to 60,000.
Okay.
That's usually what you're looking at. Again, it's going to be on the higher end if you're living in a cost of living area that's a little higher because they try to be proportional so that if you're living in somewhere that's more expensive, you want to make sure you can afford that. It ranges between 50 to 60,000. I think the highest I've ever seen was probably 65 or 70,000. Nothing more than that I've known of.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, I would say not that there's an equivalent to residency in the law because there's not. Obviously, you're going to law school, you're jumping straight in. What ends up being more realistic in line with what your residents are making is the mid-sized firm and even the solo practitioners and the solo firms, as well as public defenders and prosecutor offices. If we're going the state route, we're looking at public defenders and we're looking at prosecutors. Prosecutors are paid by the state. They might be on the state schedule, or if they're federal, they might be on the general schedule. So if anybody's ever heard of GS 13 or GS 14, it's a specific standard for a salary for government employees. And generally speaking, they're not getting paid a lot. A prosecutor coming out could, depending on their area, could be getting paid $45,000, $50,000 to start, but then they could also work their way up into the six-figure amount, but they'll also top out. So you might be topping out at the highest level at 160, 70, 180. Similar to a public defender, again, paid for by the state. If you are a public defender, you're starting out at that $50,000, $60,000 range. You're doing God's work. Oh, you're putting yourself out there to represent the people that need representation. But again, you're topping out in the low six figures at 130, 140, 150, depending on your area. That's kind of unique as far as when you're looking at what people are making coming out, at least as a lower amount. Private firms, a small defense firm or a solo firm, it might be the same thing. You're coming out making 60,000, 70,000. But then again, the world is your oyster. Depending on how well the firm does, depending on the clientele you bring in, that could then get you into the $1 million mark over the course of certain years, depending on how much you make and how much you're getting paid for your legal work.
Is there a known disparity among specialties? So for example, doing family law versus criminal law, is there a difference in pay depending on where you go?
The disparity comes in where you choose to do your work, not necessarily what category. I mean, categorically, there is some disparity. If you're going to do criminal law, overall, criminal law is going to pay less than a, personal injury attorney or a big law firm that handles mergers and acquisitions. However, and this is a caveat, if you had a boutique criminal law firm and you represented high-end clients, you represented sports athletes or famous celebrities, you could make that firm a lot of money. It's all relative to what you're doing. Now, if you're prosecuting, just know that you're working for the government. There's no, I'm going to be a private prosecutor. If you're going to be a prosecutor, you're working for the state, you're working for the government, and the dollar amount is lower there. So there's no ability to then come out and make a lot of money as a prosecutor. Usually the people that stay as a assistant district attorney, they're either trying to achieve a political office as a judge or a district attorney or maybe a mayor. Or what ends up happening is after they've learned the role of prosecutor, they then go out and either join a criminal defense firm or open their own criminal defense firm because they know exactly how it works. And they can go be a competent criminal trial attorney and charge a lot of money for knowing the inner workings of the criminal system.
Got it. The same in medicine is that the numbers that I'm throwing out are probably more 60, 70% are in employed positions or corporate positions. And then the other percentage is going to be private practice. But the difference will be that income is that you're not going to have to pay as many staff. You can pare down to the bare minimum if you own your own practice. Your income ceiling might be a little higher than what it would be whether you're a surgeon, whether you're a family doc. Private is where a lot of people look to not only make their own decisions, but also be able to make a little bit more without all the hassle of dealing with administration and a corporation.
Now, with private practice, you mentioned this with when you've gone to see lawyers, you have to either deal with a retainer or a billable rate. And this is actually at most firms, unless you're doing something that's contingent. So a contingency example would be, I'm a personal injury attorney, so we'll take the case on for free, we'll do all the work, and then hopefully there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow there. But for your own solo firm, at least in the law firm, you will create, going back to our capitalism podcast, you will create your own billable rate. People will either come and they will either pay you that billable rate or they won't. And the better you are and the more clientele you bring in, the higher that rate can go. And then obviously it tops out in certain areas, depending on your demographics, where to be competitive, you might have to stay in a certain range. For doctors who have opened up their own private practice, is it by billable rates? How does that work, especially with the fact that you might have some insurance that comes into play regarding that practice?
It's a little bit more confusing in it. And again, it depends. If you're going to do a private practice and still accept insurance, or are you going to bypass insurance and do a cash pay? There's also a newer model. We've talked about this in the past in our corporate versus private episode, is what we call DPC, direct primary care. That is going to be where you don't take insurance at all. You're having the patient pay a membership fee, essentially, and you get to see the doctor as many times as you want throughout the year. That is more of a monthly subscription model, and they will find deals for you to get labs, imaging. The doctor will take care of all that for you. Whereas there are some private practices who will still go through the insurance, which then will require them to have a biller, a person that will call the insurances. They will have to have additional staff to manage that paperwork trail and the back end of things. And so there's a lot that goes into it. And the decision to go either fully private without insurance versus with insurance is a very very, individualistic decision. Depends on if you want to have that headache of trying to fight the insurance to get your reimbursement or not.
Okay. Okay. Well, I have a few more specialties I can comment on as far as salary goes, but I want to open the floor for you. You talked about surgeons. We talked about your general family doctors. We talked about residents. What other areas of medicine do you think are worth mentioning as far as salary goes?
The last episode, we broke down specialties into primary care and specialists, and then we had the surgeons. The specialists are going to be all organ-based systems. You got your pulmonologist, which is your lung doctor, your cardiologist, which is your heart doctor, nephrologist is your kidney doctor. So all of those, they usually fall within this middle range. They're not quite as low as the 250s, 260s like the primary care folks. They're a little higher. They're usually above 320, and they can range all the way up to about 490, even close to 500,000. The reason it ranges is because if the specialty allows for procedures, then they're more likely going to get paid. So if a cardiologist is going to be going back and, fixing and treating heart attacks and putting in stents and doing bypass surgery, they're going to get paid a lot more on the high end of that range than someone like a rheumatologist who does not do any surgeries or procedures. They're mostly in clinic. They're going to get paid on the lower end. However, they still get paid more than the actual primary care physician.
Obviously, when you're trying to decide where to go, you're looking at all these numbers, you're looking at the specializations, you're looking at how much money can be made. Did you see that playing a big role in you and your colleagues as they were deciding on where they were going to go as they developed that career mentality of their path?
At the very beginning, didn't think about income at all. Once I was going through medical school, I still didn't really think about income, and I don't think the majority of people did. Our goal was to just gain as much knowledge, learn as much as we could so that we could do right for our patients. Once we got into residency, once we made the decision, then it became a little bit more real. Like, oh, we're a couple of years away from graduating residency and actually making an income. We should probably know how much our earning potential is, and then try to plan ahead to figure out how we're going to pay off our student debt, how are we going to buy a home, build our family. That's really the first time I started thinking about truly, how much can I make? Where can I make the most? And then what are the other resources I have to help me live my life appropriately? And then, of course, once you become an attending and you're actually interviewing, then you get to do the beautiful thing of negotiating. Everything's not set in stone. Depending on your skill set and your need, you may be able to increase your pay, increase certain bonuses that the employer is offering. So it varies, but I would say the majority, if not all, physicians don't really go into this field for money because there are much easier careers out there to make money where we're not having to give up almost 10 to 15 years of our lives to study and learn to be the experts in our field.
From the law student perspective, and obviously I'm still working a lot with the law students, and I hear them talk, and they ask for advice or they ask for feedback, and you have some of the bleeding hearts that are in it to do what they're destined to do, whether that's prosecutorial work, whether that's a lobbyist or maybe a constitutional attorney, something to fight for your rights. But then you have a lot of talk of, okay, how do I make the most money? And for a 22, 23, 24, 25-year-old, when they're starting to see those dollar bills and that potential, it starts really influencing competition at that law school level where the internships become that much more important. And to some extent, some of these individuals are getting paid $20, $30, $40,000 just for a 6-week internship over the summer, which is absolutely mind-blowing to me. And for reference for our listeners, we're talking about 2025. So to baseline, we're in the year 2025, going to 2026. This is where we're at right now currently. You have this notion of wondering if the monetary mindset is a little bit too concerning. Are we getting so wrapped up? And for somebody who's been in the legal field, out of the legal field, my own business owner who's been all over the place, I have different viewpoints as far as money isn't everything, and seeking out happiness is the most important thing, especially when you're looking at work-life balance and what you're called to do. And so I always wonder, are these students making the appropriate decision if it's all based on money? Because they get out into big law, that's what they're pursuing for the most part, to get paid $200,000 plus. But I don't know if they necessarily comprehend the amount of work and effort and politics that will go into their career as they move forward. It's eye-opening at times when you're looking at that. And it's from the very get-go. That is the standard. You're looking at how much money can you get paid even in that first year of law school.
I agree. Every career, every field will have people who are focused on the wrong things and they go into the career for the wrong decisions or the wrong drives. But again, majority, I think physicians truly go into it because they love medicine, they enjoy helping patients, and they want to do better for the world. But of course, the income is nice and it's needed. Something that I looked up and I wanted to make sure that the audience knows is the reason we are high income earners is because usually we graduate with a lot of student debt. I had already mentioned that we're spending at least 4 years in college. We're doing at least 4 years in medical school and then a minimum of 3 years in residency. That's to be the bare minimum of a family physician, which is paid the least. Now, if you want to get into the specialties, you'll have to do now an additional 1 to 2 years of fellowship. And then if you want to be a really high end surgeon, you actually have to do 5 years of residency and then may or may not have to do 1 or 2 additional years of fellowship. So that could be up to 15, 16 years of your life that you're dedicating. But throughout that time, you're making nothing. I told you 50 to 60,000 as a resident. It goes up minimally, maybe 5 or 6,000 every year that you are a resident. And then once you get into a fellow or a fellowship, same idea is it's usually about 65, 70,000 a year. So you're not making enough to start paying off your student debt yet. So the majority of residents and students, they're coming out with all this debt that's just going to sit there on forbearance, which is still gaining interest. That's what we have to think about when we decide how much this income is and how much it's worth. I actually looked up the numbers. The average med school debt, someone that is graduating medical school without any undergrad debt, is going to be about 220,000. That's on average. Whereas if you add on undergrad debt, so if someone is undergrad and med school debt, then it's going to be closer to 250,000. So $250,000 when you come out. Now, then you have 3 years of residency, so it's going to now build up on interest, and that can balloon up to almost 270, 290,000, depending on your interest rate. And then if you do an additional 2 or 3 years of fellowship, that's going to blow up to about 330 or 350,000. All this time that you're already dedicating to your studies, you have to worry about the student debt. How are you going to pay that? It comes out to about $3,000 to $4,000 a month of just student debt to pay back every month. If you come out as attending and you're not making enough, you're not going to be able to sustain. Of course, there are a lot of people who may choose to put student debt on the back burner and instead, because they've put off enjoying life, they're going to go out and buy a new home, they're going to buy a new car, buy everything new, go on extravagant travels and do all the amazing things that they haven't gotten to do over the last 10 to 15 years of their lives, which I understand. Then of course they're going to rack up more and build up more, and you're going to see this lavish lifestyle that a lot of doctors seem to put out front. But the majority of us, especially primary care physicians, we're just trying to get by. We're just trying to make sure that our family is comfortable.
Obviously, when it comes to the numbers, that's very eye-opening from the medical perspective, but it's eerily similar from maybe a yearly standpoint. Granted, law students don't have the residency that you have to worry about, but 4 years of college into law school is 3 years, 4 years for some individuals that are part-time or night students. But for the most part, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that the yearly tuition, depending on your law school, can range from anywhere between $30,000 or $40,000 a year, all the way up to $60,000, $70,000 a year. So you could end up getting out of law school with maybe $200,000 plus of debt. It is very possible. And then you throw in any sort of undergraduate loans that you may have taken out. Again, you're looking at $250,000 of debt. So again, it's influencing decisions. You might try to find the high paying job to get yourself out of debt the quickest, so then you can then go on to whatever it is that you really want to do and not have to be a slave to the dollar, not have to be a slave to your paycheck, which that definitely exists out there. But another two things that I just want to bring up, and I'm done with my lawyer side of the salary, is we talked about corporate practice versus private practice, and the corporate standpoint for lawyers is in-house counsel. So if you were going to go work for a company, obviously the size of the company will determine how much you're getting paid. So if you're going to go work for a Coca-Cola or a AT&T or a Northrop Grumman, you might be looking at a different salary than if you were going to go work for a startup or work for, maybe a regional company that doesn't have as big of an output as the bigger companies. But coming out as an in-house counsel, you could end up making $60,000. You could end up making $150,000, $180,000, $200,000, depending on where you're at. If you are general counsel, and the breakdown is usually there's like chief general counsel and a bunch of lawyers underneath that chief general counsel. General counsel can make, a quarter of $1 million a year, $250,000, $300,000, $400,000, again, depending on where they're located. And then finally, this is the big, heavy hitter, the big, heavy player. You're looking at partners. You're looking at partners at the big firms. You're looking at non-equity partners and equity partners. A non-equity partner is a partner that it's not necessarily the fact that you have ownership rights. You have not put in money to get the equity out of it. Anywhere from senior non-equity partner, $400,000 to $600,000 a year. If you are an equity partner where you own a bit of the firm, you could end up making $600,000 to $1 million plus. And then also there's bonus structures, and your requirements are a little bit different. Obviously, you're not going to have as many billables as the other individuals in the firm, but your requirements are business development, bringing in the clientele, going out and really shopping for those heavy hitting clients that can then pay the bills. Some senior partners, they're the ones that are doing the political conversations and the big corporate, top 500 companies in the world, trying to bring them in as clients to their firms to then pay those insane salaries and really achieve the profit structures that the big firms are trying to get after. Now, Long, after all that conversation, granted, we are removed from our first jobs. Do you want to share with the audience what you were making coming out? Because I feel comfortable sharing with the audience what my first year salary was.
Why don't you go first?
Okay. So as a first year associate, and this was me going out to a small firm, small boutique firm, my starting salary, and this was back in 2014. So my starting salary was $60,000. And when I came out, I thought I was getting paid bank. And when I actually started hearing about what my other peers were making in there, because again, at that time, information was still kind of iffy. Like Glassdoor wasn't really a thing and nobody was sharing their salary. It was a little bit of a hush-hush situation where you just didn't tell your salary to your neighbor. I thought I was getting paid really good money. And when I started seeing what some of my other peers were making, that was very eye-opening. Maybe I should have negotiated more money or more bonuses or more of this, that, and the other. And so that was my base start coming out. And since then, I've obviously made moves, and I've hit the six-figure range and beyond, and I've been able to pay off debt and buy a house and car, all the fun stuff. But looking back now, it's very eye-opening compared to some of the numbers that we're talking about here, a decade later. What about you? What was that looking like?
I mean, similarly, I didn't know what I didn't know at that time. And being a broke resident, I couldn't really hire the contract lawyer that I wanted to. But my salary starting out that very first year in a very rural place where I was doing full scope family medicine. Other than OB, I did inpatient and outpatient. I was getting paid $230,000.
Mm-hmm.
I was right out of residency. But again, my goal and our intention as a family was to, one, build a family, as well as pay down our student debt as quickly as possible. And I actually had $350,000 of student debt at that time because I didn't get any help during undergrad. I didn't get any help during residency or medical school. So a lot of things ballooned, but I did make a couple of great decisions. And this will be another topic for another episode on kind of loan repayment and the way we can structure loans and just dealing with the finance on the behind the scenes stuff. That's where I was.
That's great insight, because it's not really talked about a lot. You look online and you try to read Reddit posts and you try to ask your friends. Again, us being vulnerable, it's a good place to share where we started, because sometimes it's about the journey and where you ultimately go.
For those viewers who have lasted through the entire episode, I am actually going to put up here on the screen the breakdown of the salaries that I found. These are all information that you can find online. There's nothing that is secret. These are all very transparent numbers that both Lawyer Nik and I have found with our resources. And look it up, check our data, and just make sure if we've said anything accurate or inaccurate here, and comment below. That's a great end to our episode here on the Medical Legal Brief, where we connect law and medicine. It's always a fun time talking to you, Nik. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, like, follow, and comment on our content. And we'll see you next time on the Medical Legal Brief. Yes, we're doctors. Yes, we're lawyers. No, this podcast is not medical or legal advice. Do not take anything we say as a reason to perform your own heart surgery, represent yourself in court, or diagnose your neighbor's rash. This is for entertainment only. Think of it like hanging out with your smartest, wittiest friends, not a substitute for an actual appointment. If you act on anything we say without talking to your own professional, that's on you. Seriously, don't do that.